Today, Big Ideas at citiesofmigration.ca presents Dialogue on Diversity, Setting the Stage for Business Growth and Innovation. For the next 45 minutes, we are joined by corporate leader Jane Allen, Partner and Chief Diversity Officer at Deloitte Canada. Deloitte is a global leader in accountancy and audit and is the second largest professional services network in the world. As Partner and Chief Diversity Officer at Deloitte Canada, Jane has led the firm to its recent award and recognition as one of Canada's best diversity employers. She is also the prime mover behind a recent report intriguingly called Welcome to Canada, Now What? Also joining us from Auckland, New Zealand is today's very special interview host. I'm delighted to welcome Justin Treagus, CEO of Omega, Opportunities for Migrant Employment in Greater Auckland, to join us for a conversation about how diversity can fuel economic growth and what organizations can do to recruit international talent into a winning business strategy. Justin, welcome.
Kia ora and good morning and a very warm welcome from Auckland, New Zealand. On behalf of all of us at Omega, it is my pleasure to host this Cities of Migration webinar this morning. Some of you may know Omega exists because of the Cities of Migration vision that good ideas on integration should travel. The wonderful Treagus story made its way across the globe to Aotearoa and Auckland, New Zealand. As we all navigate our way through a rapidly changing global demographic, it is fantastic that we can also learn from people all over the globe through a simple connection to the internet. I realize we're all busy, so I want to move on to the topic fairly quickly. Today's topic, a dialogue on diversity. It is my great pleasure to introduce Jane Allen to you. Jane is a partner and Chief Diversity Officer at Deloitte. She has a long history of tackling diversity issues. Jane joined Deloitte's consulting practice in 1996, became partner in 2001 and national leader of the firm's power and utilities sector in 2004. She was named Deloitte's Chief Diversity Officer, the first role of its kind in Canada, 2008. Jane, thank you for sharing your insights with this audience of city practitioners. I now hand over to you and look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you, Kim, and thank you to the audience who are listening today. I hope that you enjoy what I'm about to discuss and that you'll have some good questions for me. All right, I'd like to begin by saying just a few words about culture, because it is what forms individual character and behavior, and the interaction of people from different cultures in the workplace is what's going to determine how inclusive and equitable a workplace is or is not. And culture is made up of all of these components that you see here: religion, family structure, the politics, history, class structure of the country that you were raised in or where you currently live, your language and education. And much of one's culture is hidden. The visible parts are how you behave and dress, etc. And the less visible parts are your personal values and attitudes, your cultural values and assumptions that are rarely talked about, but are often reflected subconsciously, consciously in the behavior that you demonstrate. The reason an understanding of culture is important is that learning to manage multicultural workforces, which many of us are having to do, is becoming a critical factor to success in business. And among all of the challenges facing businesses today, many of them of which are enumerated here, changing demographics, operating in a global environment, changing customer bases, all point to the need for greater cross-cultural competence and the ability to recruit and retain employees from different parts of the globe to meet skill requirements. So having a diverse and inclusive workplace addresses many of the business challenges on the earlier slide, and the outcome is enhanced business performance. All of the points on this page illustrate the business rationale for diversity and inclusion. It fosters innovation and creativity. It enables penetration of new markets, greater customer loyalty. It improves the acquisition, retention, satisfaction, and productivity of employees, and enhances brand reputation. All of this points to a change in focus for diversity and inclusion efforts that we see happening in some companies, and which we feel is a paradigm shift that is moving from undertaking diversity programs because it's the right thing to do from a social perspective to diversity and inclusion as a business enabler. Business performance will be improved by leveraging the diversity of your people and the inclusivity of your work environment. So our firm is participating in this paradigm shift, and our business rationale is clear to us. It wasn't always clear, and we had to take time to gather the facts and figures and present them to leadership and help them understand that we were undertaking diversity and inclusion initiatives not just because it was a good thing to do for our people, but because it was critical to our business. And you see here our business rationale. Diversity and inclusion, essentially for us, is necessary to achieve our growth targets, and we have significant growth targets. We need to attract top talent because the knowledge and skill of our people is all that we have to sell to our clients. We don't make anything. We don't manufacture anything. All we have walks in and out of our buildings every day. And the talent pool is shrinking and becoming more diverse. Our clients are also becoming more diverse, and they expect to be served by people who have a worldview, a global knowledge, and knowledge of other languages and cultures. We also believe that, and research has shown, that diverse teams offer better solutions to clients' problems. And we believe that having diversity-competent leaders improves the management of our firm. So with that short backdrop, let's move to the report itself, which, as Kim noted, we somewhat provocatively entitled, Welcome to Canada, Now What? The report's the product of a series of dialogues on diversity that we held in the spring of this year. It's the second time that we've done this kind of thing. The first one was on a different topic, and this year we chose newcomers to Canada, new immigrants. And these were roundtable discussions with large and small businesses, government organizations, social and community organizations in 9 cities across Canada, facilitated by Deloitte people, to address the question of how to better leverage skilled immigrants to improve business success. Canada, as you probably know, is a very multicultural country, yet the unemployment rate for immigrants is close to double that of people born in Canada. And even after 15 years, immigrants with a university degree are likely to be in low-skilled jobs. And university-educated immigrants who do find work in their fields tend to earn much less than their Canadian-born peers. So why did we do this? Well, we're one of Canada's major businesses. We are a significant employer. We're committed to diversity, and we feel we have a responsibility to help tackle the issue and show leadership and create a forum or a mechanism for businesses to rally around and determine how we all as a group can address this important issue. It's important not just to our own individual businesses, but it's important to the productivity of Canada. So we asked the roundtable group 3 main questions, and you can see them on the slide, and we had a very lively discussion of each of them. How can businesses harness the diversity of newcomers for business growth and innovation? What are the barriers that exist to fully integrating new immigrants, and what do businesses need to do to overcome the barriers? So these were the baseline questions that we asked, but we got into many, many more questions and very lively discussion, debate, very successful discussions. So here's what we heard. Government immigration policies came out loud and clear, and it wasn't all just complaining and moaning, but talking about real barriers that exist due to policies that we have. For example, to offer a position to a foreign professional in Canada requires what's called a labor market opinion from the federal government. That is, proof that the employer can't find the talent that he's seeking within Canada and has to go outside our boundaries to get that talent. So that process itself can take up to 6 months. And that doesn't work if you need employees right away in order to bid on a piece of work. And we had an example of a company that was in just that position in our report. It was an information technology company that needed to be able to demonstrate to a potential client that they had all the capabilities at hand. They looked internationally for people to fill the slots on the slate of candidates and found them but couldn't get them in time. so they weren't able to bid on the project and lost a significant piece of work. That's just one example of government immigration policies that are real barriers to ensuring that we're taking advantage of talented people from around the world. The foreign qualifications not being recognized. Canada has 440 regulatory bodies governing 55 industries, and in many professions, staying on top of trends and technologies is critical. If you're not able to stay on top of and be current with your particular profession or your particular skilled trade, you're going to find yourself at a great disadvantage. Many immigrants have to go through lengthy licensing or recertification processes, and that just delays their entry into the job market, and it disconnects them from professional networks that they need in order to get the jobs for which they are qualified, except in Canada. So foreign qualifications is a major issue. Now, some of the professions are addressing this, such as the medical profession and the law profession have begun to streamline their certification processes and streamline the number and type of courses that people take and help new immigrants in the job market. But there's much, much more that needs to be done. Next is recruiting bias. And there's the catch-22 of requiring local experience, requiring Canadian experience. Catch-22 being, we won't hire you unless you have it, and you can't get it unless you're hired. And that really is it's a way of raising the bar for immigrants. And I make that point in the next bullet here, setting the bar higher, not just for Canadian experience, but for language and related requirements, because of a concern regarding fit. We know that people like to hire people that are like themselves. They're much more comfortable with people that come from similar backgrounds, similar cultures, similar education than themselves, and people find it easier to hire people that are like themselves, and therefore they find a way to set the bar higher for people that aren't. And then finally, once hired, not integrating new immigrants well, not showing them the informal rules of the road or making them feel welcome. And we heard time and time again that companies can jump through hoops to get new immigrants in the door, yet if they're not going to make their workplaces welcoming, if they're not going to enable new immigrants to take full advantage of their skills and progress in the workplace, then they're really missing out on an opportunity to use those skills to improve their businesses. So what did we learn? A number of recommendations came from the dialogues, came from the roundtables, and they can be categorized into these groups. First is around policies and practices, especially related to recruitment. We need to change our recruiting practices so that we're focusing on skills and not on cultural differences. There are lots of research papers that you probably know about where companies have taken the name and tried to neutralize the language and the countries of origin in resumes when they're being reviewed. And time again, when you remove that distinction in the resumes, the immigrants come out much better in terms of where they rank in the ratings of people that are applying for jobs. So there is bias in recruiting, and it needs to be weeded out. Sometimes it's conscious, many times it's not conscious, but just focusing on it is a major step in the right direction. Providing internships. We're not talking about unpaid internships here, although we know that some companies do that, but providing short-term assignments so that immigrants can get that all-important local or Canadian experience. And that's a good way for the new immigrant to test drive the company and the company to test drive the new immigrant without necessarily making a full commitment. It's the way to take that first step and at least give a first opportunity to a new immigrant. So focusing on cultural connections, creating cultural connections, and one way to do that is to establish employee resource groups. You probably know what they are. We have a number at Deloitte. We have the Canadian Asian Network. We have the Canadian Black Professionals Network, among several others. And the purpose is multifold. First is to create a group of people who are like-minded, who can network with each other. Some will have been here longer and can show some of the newer immigrants to Canada the rules of the road, and provide them with some of the unwritten rules, unwritten knowledge that they had, that they can pass along. They can raise issues in the workplace with respect to their particular group to management. They can connect and go and do business development together out in the marketplace. The employee resource groups we have found to be quite effective, and they also serve the purpose of educating the other employees in the workplace about their culture, so that they can break the ice, overcome any barriers because of lack of intercultural knowledge, etc. Another is mentorship, both inside and outside your organization. And by that I mean having formal programs where someone new to the company is mentored by someone who has the responsibility and the obligation to ensure that the newcomer is included in important meetings, understands the success factors. And when I refer to outside the organization, mentors can come from other organizations, not just your own company. We have cross-company mentoring arrangements, several of those, and those can be quite effective. And then finally, educating existing employees so that the onus isn't all on the new immigrants to change, but it's on on existing employees as well to understand newcomers, to understand different cultures, to share the responsibility for ensuring that they are effectively integrated into the workplace, and that they feel welcomed and nurtured, and feel that they have the opportunity to have, feel that they have access to opportunities just like every other employee. So that is it in a nutshell. There's been tremendous interest in the report, lots of media coverage, and we hope that it's having an impact, and we'll have one small contribution to this very large issue. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jane. That's fascinating, and listening through it, sort of just picking up on so many of the similarities in New Zealand and Canada, both being a nation of immigrants, country that actively does recruit immigrants with a long history of multiculturalism and high levels of cultural diversity in its population. It's these ordinary facts that make diversity agenda a challenge. It's taken for granted, and we've succeeded in many areas where other countries haven't. Yet I agree that none of us, especially in times of economic pressure, can afford to be complacent about our relative success in these areas. The pace of change globally is accelerating faster than ever, especially in the business sector, and perhaps complacency is our biggest threat. Both countries risk losing an important competitive advantage by being complacent about one of their greatest assets, which is diversity, skill, talent, innovation, and that link to new markets and wealth. I'm going to invite participants to submit questions as we're going, but while we wait for those to come through, I have a number myself that I'll kick off with. Jane, we know that organizations as well as cities will be key to attracting immigrant talent as our labor market growth slows and markets pick up again. Deloitte and Toronto have obviously realized the importance of leading change, both internally and externally. Can you tell us a bit about what prompted your leadership to take the conversation to the marketplace to contribute to lifting the regional diversity footprint?
Well, we are a major employer, and we also advise companies on a variety of things, including human resource management. And we realized that this was an issue that not one company had the resources or the wherewithal to deal with, or the ability to address, and that it would take a large movement and many employers to take action. So we wanted to provide that forum, provide that mechanism for businesses to engage in the discussion, not just with each other, but with organizations that assist immigrants with governments, etc. We felt we had a responsibility to do that as a major employer, and also it was going to benefit us as well if we had more companies out there trying to make change.
Thank you. I'm going to pick up on that word. You felt you had a responsibility, because there's been a common theme through your paper. I know your Deloitte Australia paper put out a "Where is your next worker?" and we've just put out a diversity perception audit. And there's a common theme through that around the call for business to take a lead. Can you please share some of your successes in this space, and also tell us what strategies you suggest for marketing this to business leaders who don't see it as a problem that they need to address?
Sure. So at the strategic level, what we're working very hard on is creating a culture of inclusion and educating our leaders. We started at the top. We felt that if our most senior leaders weren't understanding diversity, talking about it, making an effort, then we wouldn't get very far. So we went through an intensive education process with them, the top 50 leaders in the company, that included 360-degree assessments of their diversity competencies, education using outside vendors on all of the aspects of diversity, so that they felt comfortable even having the conversation and then going the next step, which would be to make decisions differently and act in a more inclusive manner. So creating the culture of inclusion through educating our leaders, and now we're trickling that down to the rest of the organization, was very important for us. And then more tactically, a few things that we do for new immigrants is when they join our firm, we assign buddies to them. We call them buddies. So for the first year, they have someone whose job it is to make sure that they know the ropes, so to speak. We've established people networks that I mentioned, and we work with external organizations like the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council, or TRIAC, and they have sister organizations across the country where we provide Deloitte staff as mentors to new immigrants to help them with job search, with resume writing, with interview skills, etc., some of whom we end up hiring ourselves, but mostly it's to create that larger pool of really job-ready new immigrants.
Yeah.
So in terms of strategies for marketing diversity to business leaders, I mentioned developing the business rationale. I mean, that is really key, because I think you'll get buy-in from leaders to a certain extent if it's all about, well, the right thing to do. But if you can demonstrate through facts and figures the impact that having a diverse and inclusive workforce is going to have on the business, then you'll get their heads as well as their hearts, and you'll see real action. So for us, it was all about gathering statistics on how many new immigrants to Canada are there that have the qualifications that we need to hire from. What are our clients demanding in terms of diverse teams, and how diverse are our clients? So we gathered all that information, made a very compelling business case, and I think that really helped to turn the corner.
Thank you. And I really enjoyed that slide on the business case and that highlighting of the business benefits. Is there a disconnect between those business benefits that we highlight, which sits on the business enabler side of the scale, and many existing measuring tools which sit on that the right thing to do, or the compliance side of the scale? While monitoring diversity across a range of indicators is important, this disconnect, if it is there, has the potential to cause tension between the players. Is that so? And if so, how are you managing to address it?
Yeah, it's a very good point. So on the right-hand side of that balance slide, if you remember, it was all about the diversity and representation at different levels. That is, how many people of different groups do you have at different levels in your organization, and that's relatively easy to measure. On the left-hand side, you need different metrics, i.e. to measure how, what effect, what impact diversity and inclusion is having on your company. So we turn to things like our employee engagement scores. We do our employee engagement survey biannually, and it measures how different groups are feeling towards their employment at our firm, whether there are things that we could improve, what are the big gaps between different diversity groups in terms of their experience, positive or negative, with the firm, and that helps drive a lot of initiatives on our part. The other thing that we're starting to do is every time we do a client service assessment, and that is interviewing clients after we've done a piece of work to see how well we did, we ask them questions about how inclusive and what our diversity behaviors were. We explain to them what we're trying to achieve. You know, we know that they, in many cases, have similar values, and we want to understand if we're living up to what we're saying about our values and our commitment. So that's one thing that we have done. We measure retention of top talent from diverse groups, and we also measure the revenues that come from our people networks and their work in the marketplace. That one's a little more difficult to track, but we are anyway. So if our Black Professionals Network has events, business events with clients, and that results in work, we measure that and chalk that up to our diversity and inclusion initiative.
Thank you. Just a reminder to please keep sending in your questions. I'm going to ask one more question, and hopefully a few more will come in by then, and then I'm going to hand over to Kim to pick up on some of those questions. The last one, Kim, I think another thing we have in common is just such a large number of small businesses who typically don't have the HR capacity to make the required organizational change. What advice are you taking out, or what initiatives are you engaging on to try and advance the diversity agenda within those small businesses?
Well, a couple of things that I would say to that. First is that there are a number of low or no-cost ways for small businesses to start addressing the issue. One is to use existing employees that are from different cultural backgrounds to educate the others. You know, very simple things like holding lunch and learns and celebrating different cultural observances, etc. It seems, you know, pretty obvious, but they can be really effective. We've certainly found that to be so. And then secondly, establishing, if you don't have them, roundtable discussions with representatives from different companies. We do this in Toronto. It was a very informal group of people that had responsibilities for diversity, my counterparts, if you will, in other organizations that decided to get together once a quarter just to share ideas, share stories, share best practices, successes, so that you can learn from each other, and it doesn't cost a thing. You meet in somebody's meeting room once a quarter, and it's very, very effective. We also work closely with organizations like Treagus, as I mentioned, and another diversity organization in Canada who have programs for small and large businesses on how to more effectively integrate immigrants and how to overcome some of the barriers that I described.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jane and Justin, for that excellent presentation, Jane, and for all the resources that I see that Evelyn has put on screen. And thank you, Justin, for those excellent questions from New Zealand. We are going to go right now to our listeners. We have a number of questions that have come in. The first question that I'll put to you, Jane, is from Julia Stones. Julia writes, Jane has talked about research showing more diverse teams creating better solutions for clients. Are there tangible results to support this? Meaning, example, is there research which shows better management skills, increases a firm's capital by, 65%, and she cites Bloom, Nicholas, and Van Ron Riemann to support the statistic that she offers there. So, Jane, please comment to Julia Stone's question about the value of more diverse teams.
So, Julia, I haven't seen research that has gone down to the granular level that you've asked for, which is, tell me the ROI on diverse teams. But I think that's probably because nobody has been measuring it. And if someone started, I think that we would definitely see that there's an ROI. Well, that's my belief at any rate. So the research that I've seen is from researchers at IMD, Stephen Page, others who look very closely at the impacts of having different perspectives on decision making. I mean, we have lots of anecdotal evidence of diversity of teams causing breakthroughs in thinking, leading to better results for clients. But is there something that I've seen that creates a direct relation with ROI? I haven't seen it yet, but it will not surprise me in the least if we see it very soon.
Very good. I have another question, this one from one Rolf Sigard, who asks, how do you measure the economic impact of diversity within Deloitte?
Well, some of the measures that I spoke of before, we look at things like turnover rates, because if we are seeing a higher turnover in people from diverse backgrounds, we know that that's costing us more to hire, to train, to retain, etc. We also look at, as I mentioned, when we have our people networks doing marketplace activities, and that results in revenue. That's something that we measure. And yeah, those are the two key things.
Great. Okay, next question comes from Claire and John, and they ask, one of the issues we see is recruiters or hiring managers who understand the importance of diversity but don't get the concept of global mobility and the importance of getting this right. Diversity is more viewed as to what we can get from the local market. Many small employers put it in the too hard basket, moving people from offshore. How do you recommend we go about changing the mindset of these people?
Well, it is difficult for smaller organizations that don't do a lot of hiring and would have to establish linkages with organizations overseas to find talent. And for larger organizations, it should be less difficult. We have offices in many countries around the world, so it's a little easier for us because we have the connections to the organizations that can provide the talent that we need. And one of the subjects that did come up in our dialogues and in our roundtables was the need for employers of any size to connect. And it's so much easier to do these days with technology, as we've seen from this call. Connect through technology to countries where they believe there's a source of skills and talent that they need in their organization. Make that connection. If possible, have a personal visit. But make the connections and strengthen them, try them out, see how they work, and just carry them on that way. And it is difficult to get the global mindset, but I think once you begin to do research into the availability of labor and skilled talent in other countries, you realize that there's a whole talent pool beyond your local market, and I think that's the mindset you're referring to that needs to be brought about.
Thank you. Now I have a question from Jim Sands out in Canada's West Coast from Spark BC. Jim asks, how successful have you been in supporting diversity at senior decision-making levels, i.e. at board and senior management levels?
So luckily, we started at the board and senior management levels. We had a very strong CEO, or a CEO that felt very strongly about the importance of diversity and inclusion, and he and the chair of our board were like-minded when it came to that, for all of the reasons that I described, in that we need to have top talent and we need to get it from wherever we can find it. And if there are barriers to us getting that, either our own biases in how we recruit or our own biases in how we promote people that's causing us to lose talented people because they think that they can't get ahead because there's nobody like them, they understood. Our senior leaders understood that that was important. And so from there, we launched on this education program for our partners so that they could learn what our CEO and our board chair already knew. It also required presenting them with the facts, because many of them really hadn't given it a whole lot of thought, and had we not presented them with some of the facts and figures, would have had no idea that we had issues to deal with. But once we did that, once they knew that it was important to our CEO and board chair, it wasn't difficult to get them on site.
Great. I've got a question here from Parker Johnson. I think this is a question that we could take a long time discussing, but so maybe we'll just get your top tips here. Parker Johnson asks, how do you respond effectively to resistance to inclusion and diversity at Deloitte?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there will always be resistors. And the best answer I can give is to say that you need to continue to communicate about it, and you need to continue to educate people about different cultures, about the value of having diversity and inclusion in your workforce. There's nothing you can do about people that have, inbred biases that they refuse to overcome. But we have found that education goes a long, long way. There was a time in the not-too-distant past that we wouldn't have even discussed people from different cultures, let alone gays and lesbians in our workplace. But by starting the conversation, by having educational programs, and they don't have to be big, expensive ones, you start people feeling more comfortable and having more conversations about the subject.
Very good. Now I have another question from Rolf Sigard. He asks whether Deloitte works with government in Canada or elsewhere to influence policy decisions around diversity issues.
We do. We have lots of inroads and connections with government. They are our clients, and they are also an important stakeholder group for us as a firm. We are regulated, and it's important for us to understand our regulators and be closely associated with them, understand what their issues are, and for us to convey to governments what's of concern to us as a business in Canada. So we make every effort to influence government decisions where we think it's important to us as a business or for us as participants in the Canadian economy.
That's great. Well, this question is somewhat related from Brent Charette. He asks, regulatory bodies, which you discussed in your presentation, can be a significant barrier. How do we get these gatekeepers to recognize overseas education and experience?
It's a long process, and we as employers can only impress upon them what our needs are and work with them to help them advance their thinking in how to recognize credentials. It's a long road. It's unfortunate that it's a long road, but we are working with them as well, and we think that other businesses need to do the same.
Very good. I have a different question from Sam. Sam harks back to your research. He asks whether in your research you've found statistics showing difficulty for foreign students whose native language is not English, but who received education in, I guess, the country of application, in Canada or Australia, New Zealand, to be employed compared to local students.
So this, I think,
the foreign students whose native language is not English, but were educated in the country.
Yeah, I'm guessing that this question is all about if the language skills aren't as great.
Yeah.
What are the issues there? And we definitely see issues. In our business, it's imperative that people have very good English language skills because our clients are English speaking in Canada, and it's important. Well, all of our people will interact with clients and will need to be able to influence them and present to them and that kind of thing. So English is very important, and we make a point of ensuring that when we're interviewing applicants that they're going to be able to communicate with our clients and with our employees at a satisfactory level of English. Now, in some cases we don't get it right. We're bringing in people from overseas, or we've had an interview process that doesn't quite work, and we'll offer language lessons, and I know a lot of companies do the same. If they've got the basic technical skills that you need, you don't want to have to let them go because necessarily because their language is not to snuff when some courses would bring them up to the level that you need them to be. But absolutely, language is important to us. The other thing that we have seen, though, is that language is sometimes used as, I'll say, an excuse to not continue with a new immigrant. In performance reviews of new immigrants, you'll often see that, well, their language isn't up to snuff and therefore we can't keep them. Well, that is a comment that's masking other issues that they have from more of a cultural standpoint. So that's where education and bias awareness comes into play and is important.
Very good. Well, we have time for just one more question, and this question comes from Nick Montalto in the U.S. He asks, do the arguments you make with regard to the advantages of a diverse workforce apply to lesser skilled or lower skilled immigrants? The resistance to this segment of the immigrant population may be more intense, and what kind of
Yes, I would say that they do apply to lesser skilled and working class immigrants as well. Now, every country has their own requirements for the types of workers that they permit to come into the country, and most of them require certain skills to match what their labor force requires, or what their employment base requires. But most definitely, I mean, the issues that I discussed are ones that, for the most part, apply to immigrants, no matter what kinds of skills they're bringing in or what class they're in terms of, particularly in terms of recruiting bias and inclusion in the workforce once they have been hired.
Well, that's great. Well, that concludes our session today, our 45-minute, our big idea with Jane Allen in Toronto and Justin Treagus in Auckland. I'd like to thank you very much for spending this hour with us, and on behalf of all of our participants, to again thank Jane Allen in Toronto with Deloitte Canada and Justin Treagus in Auckland with Omega.